You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, April 3rd, 2025. It's 7:37 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And today, this evening, I thought that I would talk about how to remap your native attachment conditioning and why it's important to do that now when there's so much pressure for us all to just go into freeze mode and not do anything in response to what's happening. Actually, it might mean it's a better time to do the attachment work so that you are then free to respond to things. The attachment conditioning, of course, starts very early in the very beginning. That interaction with the caregiver, that dyadic relationship, and in the way that they look at us and understand us, gives us a sense of confidence that we can manage the world, or actually takes it away from us that we can't get the world to respond to us in a way that will provide the care that we need. You were just expressive as an infant. There's no self-consciousness there. And then if you have a sensitively enough attuned caregiver, they tune into you, they connect empathetically, they understand what you're feeling, they mirror that back to you so that you can understand that these kinds of sensations, these kinds of feelings, these kinds of expressions are interpreted in this way. And then they take care of us, and it's that loop where we feel seen and we feel that we can have an effect on the world that develops that sense of confidence, that sense of security. And also we begin to learn that if I make this expression, I can get that care. And so we can enter into a collaborative dialogue with the caregiver, and they can take care of us in a way that we need. And so we have a sense of security, a sense of safety. But if that doesn't happen, we develop other points of view about the world. Anxious avoidant kids who grow up to be dismissing discover that actually there's nothing that they can do to get a response from the caregiver that actually is mapped to their authentic needs. And so what they learn to do is tune into the needs of the caregiver and how they need to be addressed in that whole apparatus of idealization, stripping out of everything negative, really providing a performative expression for the caregivers that maps onto what the caregivers want from the child. Anxious ambivalent children grow up in a chaotic environment where it's unpredictable. They could do the same thing 3 times and get 3 different responses, so there's no need really to figure out what exactly to do. It's just a matter of trying to get attention, trying to get care. Every now and then, the caregiver responds in a way that's meaningful to the child. And the delusion of that approach is that I'm causing the caregiver to be responsive to me, but actually what's happening is the child's needs are just aligning with the caregiver's need in that moment, even though it appears to the child that they did something to get their needs met. Disorganized kids, of course, hide because the caregiver themselves is the source of fearfulness or the source of harm, and so they become quite protective that way. They're disorganized in how they respond, but mainly they learn to hide, and they don't have much of a sense of security in the world. They're quite frightened of everything. Now, if this were just ideas that we had in our head and we could hear this information once and change our mind about it and just happily go on with a different approach to all of this, that would be one thing. But actually, because we're born and our brains are partially formed, brainstem intact, right brain, partially formed left brain, not so much. We grow in response to the environment, the physical structure of our brain. So when we talk about remapping or reconditioning our attachment strategy, we are talking about a brain that's structured along the lines of our attachment conditioning. So it isn't so much a matter of changing our minds as a matter of, I like to call it skills training. We have to retrain the brain to respond in a different way than it would ordinarily. And part of this is also the view that we hold. In Buddhism, we talk about views or mind states, the way that the world appears to us. When we begin to examine the nature of the way that we perceive the world and perceive ourselves in the world, we need to remap that. And that's what we're really talking about, changing. I like to call it a database, the perceptual database, so that it operates differently. In the way that Buddhist thought goes is we have the capacity to sense something. If there's an object that can be sensed by that sense gate and there's contact, we have consciousness of a sensing experience that arises. It's then evaluated for importance. Does it need urgent attention? Does it not matter whether we get to it? Is there time for a pleasant experience? And that creates a queue of these mind moments. We don't take a complete survey of everything that's in front of us and then create a working model of that. We really collect these highly curated mind moments of things that we prefer. And then we develop, those highly curated selections form a queue. And then as they reach the top of the queue, they're compared to the perceptual database. And the meaning, if there is one in the database that maps onto the current moment, sensing experience, then they attach, and conceptual reality unfolds, but it unfolds with this meaning attached to it, these definitions attached. Unless it's novel, and then the imagination will provide the meaning. But most of the time, these long threads of meaning attach to the experience of the present moment. And so we're in this experience of what's happening right now, but it's completely informed by our past understanding of these conditions. And so there's a richness in each moment of the absolute present moment and what's happening now, and the meaning that we've given it. That meaning is tied to these long, some of them all the way back to the beginning of our lives, this richness of meaning. As each moment unfolds, part of what unfolds is the choices that you can make for the next moment. And this is really where the view is so important. When we get into these rigid, reactive attachment views, we see only the things that we think are possible for us and not the full range of choices that are in front of us. And then if we choose one of those things, all of the choices except for the one we've chosen drop away, and in the next moment what unfolds are all of the choices that are linked to the choice that we just made. In Buddhism, this is called conditionality. The conditions of the previous moment set up the conditions of this moment. This moment is setting up the conditions for the next moment. And so it rolls. You might notice the first time I really had a clear image of it, I was sitting in meditation and I heard a bird chirp. And then I noticed the mind produced a visual image of a bird chirping, but it wasn't a picture of the bird who was currently chirping. It was a memory of a bird chirping. So I'm then in the sound of the present moment with the bird chirping, but my thoughts are of a previous moment of the bird chirping. But I'm in visual thinking and I'm in auditory thinking. And then there's a sequence of words, a sequence of thoughts that follow it. Thoughts, of course, produce emotion, and then I'm in the body experiencing the emotion. all of these cascades, these moments of sensing, opportune you to the next moment of sensing. And we cascade through these experiences of creating our experience, depending on where we're focused. Everything else we miss. What's behind you? Do you know? Do you remember what's behind you without looking? Sort of. Of course, if you turn around and look at it, oh yes, obviously, that's always been there. I put it there. That's what's there. Each moment. Now, when we begin to limit what we think is possible, then that whole range of choices open up. We only see the ones that we think are possible for us. So if you don't believe something, you don't believe you could have something, or it very often doesn't appear. Have you ever found yourself searching the apartment or the house that you live in for your car keys and not finding them? And then all of a sudden you find them in a place you've already looked 3 times, miraculously appearing. Understanding we really do create these environments we live in, and they're curated by our preferences for them. And if we don't actively refresh them all the time, we could actually be operating in an image from before, not even in the appearance of now, would it?
Yeah, I realize the appearance of now is no view.
Right. So you're in an equanimous state.
It's not that I'm holding a positive view, but I'm just not holding any view. Just for a second, just for a moment. Just before the thought kicks in.
Right. Before the meaning attaches.
Right. And the meaning attaches still happens for some reason. And I think a part of me does not want it to happen, even though I can see it happening because it's unpleasant, but it still happens.
Right. You can't get into that place of no self where there just isn't experience.
Right. I think I've got used to it so much that I think I've basically gotten attached to it in some sense.
The no
But
self state or the self state.
the no self state, it's very calming, but it's also forgetful. I would tend to sometimes not remember.
Right. I think that the difficulty, particularly with the way that the Theravada meditation is practiced, the effect of the no self state means that the negotiator, the conscious negotiator with self and world isn't online. And so you don't really make memories. You don't really, you could not, well, I guess you could communicate pretty well, but you wouldn't remember it very much.
But that's the same with the dance approach, right? In some sense, even though when you're seeing these things, you're not getting reactive to it, but you know.
Well, that in the identification with awareness, that you're in awareness and you're watching all of the experiences arise and pass, including the self experience. But there is that. It's a different. When they did the brain scans of people who were meditating differently, different parts of the brain were affected, and in that I think it was Dan and Jed Brewer did it, but well, the Theravada meditators shut down the ACC, so there was no self-experience to moderate anything, to remember anything. The Tibetan meditators shifted from the local orientation of self to the global orientation of awareness, but the activations were all still engaged with in a way. Which I think I have a preference for that. So
Yeah, I realize that the no self is much more I don't know, relaxing is not the right word, but it's more equanimous. It's like I don't have a big responsibility, but the dance approach requires that
right.
like it's a lot of energy consuming to know everything as itself, as awareness. So
Yeah. But then it acquires a sacredness, which is quite pleasant.
Still a lot of effort in some sense,
But not an unpleasant effort.
right? Yeah, right.
Um,
A good reminder for me to get back in that state.
you know the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Here we are. Cursed.
So what's the curse? May you live in interesting times?
Yeah. The other choice is to live in stable, predictable times, right?
Hmm.
The thing about chaos, the thing about the intentional creation of chaos, particularly at the level that it's been created in our country, is that it's frightening to be in a constant state of not being able to predict what's going to happen. And that tends to activate the attachment system. Um, and then we seek proximity and safety to someone, but it also shuts down the exploration system, which makes the responses harder because you can't figure out what to do in response to the constant changing, the constant chaos. And so part of this is to seek proximity and safety, but also to be able to respond in a way that will be helpful in the world as it's changing. If you don't undertake to change insecure, disorganized attachment, what you also notice that accompanies those particular attachment strategies is a lack of resilience. It's hard to reboot all the time. It's hard to come back into balance. It's hard to settle the attachment system. For preoccupied people, for instance, it's very hard to settle the attachment system, then to push it into the exploration system to know how to respond. For dismissing people where the attachment system is mostly suppressed, the exploration system is around gathering resources and not so much around exploring for meaning, but and so that it makes you quite adaptable to the situations as they are, but not so good at evaluating which ones need to be resisted. Disorganized people, of course, it's an overwhelming experience of chaos, and so they're very hard for them to settle in and be able to respond. In would it?
Sorry, quickly. So you could say that disorganized is holding a view that they're in a constant state of fear all the time. The view that they're holding is that they're in danger all the time as adults.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we call the victim mentality?
A victim, well, a I think that there's a few things about the victim mentality that are different than that. For instance, the hard right in this country is convinced that they've been victimized over generations. And if you look at the language, for instance, of the tariffs, it's all about we've been taken advantage of, we've been cheated, and the whole litany of that expression, which feeds into that idea of the victim mentality. But what also accompanies the victim mentality is a sense of entitlement, that we are entitled to a world that is different than that. And so we feel because of that entitlement that we can take the things that we want rather than to collaborate in changing things. It's a justification for these extremes of behavior, the combination of that sense of victimization from another force and a sense of entitlement. Christian.
George, I've heard a formulation that I kind of like, which is like someone else stole our enjoyment and we need to get it back, which kind of encapsulates both that like entitlement and that victim and that kind of victimhood.
Yeah, so if I'm depressed and I want to be not depressed, is that entitlement? Or if I lost my job, for example, and the company fired me, is that entitlement?
The company took my job and gave it to somebody else who wasn't entitled to it because of DEI. So I'm unemployed, and somebody who's less qualified than me has the job. But I should be entitled to the position that I had before. And so, because I'm inherently more qualified based on whatever factors are being amplified. So I'm entitled to take what I want. That's different than I'm depressed and I would like not to be depressed. Or I'm unemployed and I would like a job. Paul?
George, I wonder if you have an opinion on, in terms of these views tracking, one of them being the zero-sum view, as in like, to maybe use the trade lens that's going on, right? It's all a cynical zero-sum game. Anyone who believes you'll be better off by collaborating through trade is a fool, or they're lying, or both. Therefore, we need to stop world trade so we can become rich again. And you can insert that into the job thing wherever you want, but just seeing it like, for me to be better off, someone else has to lose something by zero sum. Do you think that actually has any kind of correlation or integration with any of the attachment views?
Well, it's a kind of, the reason that it, to suggest that America has not enriched itself on global trade is, simply not factual.
George, wouldn't you say that the zero sum view is the very transactional kind of like hyper dismissive view?
It is a very transactional view, but it's also a manufactured view because it isn't what's happening.
What isn't that? Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, as in, like, I guess what I'm trying to get a sense of is there like a Buddhist style view powering it versus it's a storyline we're adding on to make our claim of why we have to have tariffs and beat the other guys to bring our manufacturing back, which is just a sort of an analytical falsehood as opposed to a I can't see a possibility of analyzing any other way because my view is so rigid.
Well, it is a rigid view, and what would have to happen, the way that I think of it, is that you would have to be willing to touch into the terrible sadness. And if you're so defended that you can't touch into the terrible sadness, you have to create these defensive postures that justify not doing it.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I think that what we've seen in this country anyway, and what has caused this is that the legislation, particularly around the tax code, has changed and is solidly in favor of the top. I think that they pulled the money up into the top 10%, into the top 1%. Now they're compressing it further into the top 100th of a percent people. And working people and poor people were the first people that they stripped of assets, and then they stripped the middle class of assets, but they left the upper middle class alone. They actually moved along. And with the upper class. And each time they voted out the Republicans who were stripping them of the money and pushed in the Democrats didn't do anything to reverse this kind of financial movement of money up. And it is a lot of money. Some of the estimates are $60 trillion worth of assets have been moved up the chain. To the point that there is no remedy for that group of people in our society. There is no fairness for that group of in our society. And so now that sense of victimization is embedded in this 40-year process of limiting their potential, gutting the public school system so that children don't have much in the way of an opportunity there. And what do you do then? Then you turn toward these really fairly fantastical narratives about what's happening, because at least you feel some attention to what's happening to you and to your family. And it's not unjustified by the conduct of the country over the last 40 years. It just doesn't happen to be true, nor will it be particularly helpful, I don't think, to the people that need that. I was walking through downtown Los Angeles on Tuesday night, and it was really sort of Blade Runner-y in the mass of humanity that's just living on the streets, barefooted, a pair of pants with a blanket, screaming into the night, but not one person, one every couple of 10 feet, hundreds of people. So it's quite shocking, I think, if you don't get inured to the brutality of our society. Attachment systems are highly correlated to resources. And so poverty is highly correlated to disorganized attachment, insecure attachment. People who are insecure, disorganized, people who are disorganized do much less well than people who are organized. So there's a constant momentum there in family systems.
Is it because they've associated the sense of safety with money, or
the mental state of the caregivers, based on their ability to provide food, shelter, clothing, and medicine to their children?
Right.
When you're resource challenged and you can't reliably provide those things, it affects your state of mind. And then that's transmitted to your children. Of course, 85% of us inherit the attachment strategy of our caregivers. And so you have a 70% chance of having the same attachment strategy as your great grandmother. So it's transgenerationally stable in its transmission, which makes sense, because if you're a child and the window of learning opens, and you're in a dyadic relationship with the caregiver, they're going to be able to teach you what they know. They're not going to be able to teach you what they don't. And you're going to learn that, and you're not going to be able to learn something that your caregiver doesn't offer to you. And so you form the same attachment functioning, which actually works well, because then you have the attachment functioning in a family where those attachment systems operate, so that you fit into the family system you're in, and you're able to operate in that family system. The dilemma for us, of course, is we age, and so when we become adolescents and youths and adults in the world, we have to integrate our attachment system with the attachment system of someone else, and in order to be able to form a relationship with them. We have to be able to integrate our conflict resolution strategies that we learned in our family systems by watching people in our family systems resolve conflict with somebody else's family systems, somebody else's conflict resolution system, which they learned in their family system. And as you can get those conflict resolution strategies to knit, and you remain hopeful that you can solve problems in the relationship, then the relationships are quite resilient. And if you have the feeling that you can't get these conflict resolution strategies to map very well, and you begin to lose hope that you'll be able to successfully negotiate conflict in a relationship, you will lose hope and the relationship will fail. If we push that out onto society, I think that because of this system of these terrible consequences as the result of one party then another party not resolving it, it's easy to lose hope that there's any kind of resolution available to us in the system. And then there's no really need to preserve the system itself. If you add on to that the complexity of capital's relationship to climate change, it's an unprecedented time. The first loop that's going to give way is the ability to insure anything. Then what do you do? If you want to buy a house and you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage, then you can't buy a house unless you have the money to buy a house. And then suddenly we're back to rich people owning everything and the rest of us renting. Christian.
This is probably really cynical of me and why I should definitely not be an economist, but I keep thinking that all of this like tariff chaos is like the only actual way we're capable of like reducing emissions by just like driving consumer spending into a hole. So that's my little dialectical take on all this stuff.
Well, yeah. In the meantime, here we are, right, in our individual lives, doing the tasks of our individual days. How does that make sense? How do you pay attention and how do you respond in a way that is meaningful both to you, but has some effect, if there is such a possibility, and then carrying on with the life that we have, each of us. That's our present dilemma. The resilience that comes from security is actually really useful. And I think that it comes largely from not being overwhelmed by the fearfulness of insecurity and disorganization. There's a sense of really that secure view is that if I need people to take care of me, they're available to me and they will take care of me. And when you don't have that sense, we just naturally begin to limit the risk taking that we're willing to do. And in limiting the risk taking, we often limit the adventure of finding meaning. And without meaning, I like to call it the creeping despair of not having a life that we feel is worth living comes on us. And how do we overcome that? Budit?
I realize the hope versus hopelessness. I know you've mentioned this so many times, but I just completely sort of glanced over it. It's so important. And I realized that. And that is in every attachment conditioning, right? Not just disorganized, but it's in every insecure
What
attachment.
did you say?
Oh, the hopelessness exists
Oh,
in
yeah.
every style of attachment. Yes.
Um, I wonder if secure people think that so much, natively secure people. There's a kind of optimism in the idea that you're capable and the world will meet your needs. That isn't in the other attachment strategies. Even when you earn security, because you have the native brain that you had, the native attachment brain that you had, things can easily trigger an old attachment response, which you recognize and respond to differently, but it's still the automatic response is there.
I think it's separate. I think Dan separates it. I think now I just remembered. I think he does in the self-esteem protocol, the
Yeah,
self-esteem, which is not in the secure attachment, but I just realized how important that is. The hope versus hopelessness in everything that you do, right? Not just relationships.
right,
Like even a single task that I'm not able to do, that there is a hope that I will be able to do it in the future.
right, right. That I can learn it, I can develop the skill. So, waking up in the morning and beginning the day in a way that feels nurturing is organized around meaning. What part of the day is the best for you to then pursue meaning, and can you block that out so that that's what you do in that part of the day? And then relegate the secondary exploration to the parts of the day where you're not as brilliant as you are in those few hours when you can do the primary exploration. I think that to see, you know, what is it? We're all of us are here in it together on this planet, and all of us are in this human condition. And the human condition is that we are really looking for these. We're looking to connect and find meaning, and being engaged in the social world. Oh, I'm trying to remember the name. Dorothy Parker. Do you know who Dorothy Parker was? She was anyway. She was in the 30s and 40s. She was a wit, and she said, "If you want to have an educated conversation with a woman, then you have to allow women to be educated." Fairly straightforward, right? The idea was you can't have a reasonable conversation with women because they don't respond. You could really extend that out to people if you deny people an opportunity to develop themselves fully. You can't complain that they haven't developed themselves fully, or blame them for that if you prevent them from developing. But that's essentially what our culture does with really a vast majority of the population. I was reading the paper, and it said that there was a recent study that determined that 50% of Nobel Prizes went to people that were born in the top 5% of the economic distribution. 50%. And the remaining 50% of the Nobel Prizes went to the people that fell at the next 6% of the economic distribution. There are virtually no Nobel Prizes awarded to people born in the bottom 90% of the economic distribution. Is this to conclude that there is nobody who's capable in 90% of the population? I think it was Jay Gould who said that the next Einstein is more likely to be parking your car than to solving physics problems because of the nature of our education system. So here we are. How do you see people? How do you have a compassionate response to people in the circumstances that they're in, when power over those circumstances is limited? What was the power that you had to change your attachment conditioning when you were a year old and you looked around and realized that your attachment conditioning was going sideways? It was going to be terrible. What did you do? Maybe you waited till 18 months.
George, I didn't have bootstraps back then. Just these tiny little shoes.
I'm glad you have them now. So how do we have that response, that compassionate response, that willingness to care for people, to meet them where they are? I think that's our goal. What do you say we do some meditation? What would you like to do?
Some ideal parent, maybe?
Oh, yeah, we could do that if you want to. You ready? So go ahead and settle in. Let the scene fade, finding your way out of there. I'll count from 5 to 1. When I reach 1, you'll be fully present, fully awake. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fully awake, settled in the experience. How's that? So around here, what's coming up in April is a level 2 on Friday mornings. We have a combination, an open class, but also for people in the helping profession. So we're going to have a dialogue about how this work happens in that kind of environment that's included in the class, which is not how we would typically do in a regular class, but there has that additional focus on it. There are spaces left in that. It's on the website. Take a look. What else is going to happen? Let's have a look. Let's see here. In May, we have a level 1 starting on the 17th, going for four Saturdays. And then we're going to start a level 2 attachment class on June 19th, which is a Thursday, so that's a better day. Another level 1 in July, so that's what's coming up. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're resourced and you can make a donation, you will. There's a donation link on the website. Let's see here. Thanks for your practice. Good to see you. See you soon.
Thank you, George. Have a good evening.